Hello, everybody. Welcome into Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. Today is Friday, October 18th. Hope everybody is having a wonderful day so far. We have a big show. As always, on Fridays, we do our game picks for the NFL and college football, but also a busy day in sports yesterday. We had huge news out of the MLB with plenty of massive games happening in the playoffs in the ALCS, a classic, a game that will go down in history forever, and another dominating victory from the Dodgers in the NLCS. They play a doubleheader today, starting in just about 6 minutes. We will go over predictions for those games. We'll go over the games that took place last night. Of course, our game picks and much more. But before we do that, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Or if you are on YouTube, you can use that super chat feature. If you do either of those two things, a message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to ask, go ahead and throw that in the comments. Throw it in the chat. Appreciate all of you guys for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Friday, October 18th. But we are going to start off our show in football before we get to baseball. Thursday night football took place last night, a homecoming for Sean Payton, his first game since leaving New Orleans, and it was an incredible game for the Broncos. Overall, it was an ugly game, a lot like we expected it to be. This was not one of those games on paper or in real life that looked like it was going to be an exciting one to watch. But still, there were a lot of takeaways from this one. First of all, the Broncos' offensive line, and I think that's the thing that I was the most impressed with on this one. Their offensive line played awesome. They, all season long, had struggled to get anything going in the running game. For Javonte Williams, a really talented running back, in my opinion, that had a bunch of injury early in his career, he's finally fully healthy. He has been for about a season and a half at this point, but the Broncos' offensive line had been unable to open up those holes, open up those lanes, get that offense going outside of just dinks and dunks from Bo Nix. And while there were plenty of dinks and dunks from Bo Nix, you saw a huge game from Javonte Williams. He caught a touchdown. He ran for a touchdown. He had by far his best game in the last year. This was a huge get for them. We talked about yesterday when we were previewing the game, Mike McGlinchey coming back, and I didn't think it was going to be that big of an impact. It was a huge impact, and I know it's against the Saints. The Saints are a team that are very, very banged up, both offensively and defensively, and I know it wasn't all good for both sides. There was a lot of bad all around, but I was very impressed by that Broncos offensive line unit, and again, regardless of how soft that schedule is, they continue to win football games. They are putting themselves in the wild card race pretty strongly with a weak middle pack of the AFC. There's no reason why, if they continue to play like this, continue to put up 33 points in a win, that they can't, especially with the way that defense is playing. I was very impressed with the Broncos overall. That defense, without Pat Surtain, without their best player, was able to turn the Saints over 3 or 4 times, including a pick six, fumble six, whatever they decided to call it there at the end, to basically put the game away at a point where it was basically over anyway, but definitely seal the victory. That was a total team performance by the Broncos. And again, we talked about the main story heading in being Sean Payton's homecoming, and I think that had a lot to do with it. The Broncos were clearly motivated. They wanted this game. And I think when you see a team that clearly wants something, we saw it with the Lions last week, we saw it with the Broncos this week, they're going to come out with a different fire, a different passion than the Saints were ready for, than the Cowboys were ready for. There's plenty of, other examples of this, but they were ready, they brought out the bag, and they won this game handily. That was an awesome performance by the Broncos. Turning our attention to the Saints, though, there are a lot of issues with this Saints team. They have scored 86 points outside of weeks 1 and 2. In weeks 1 and 2, they scored 91 points. So in 5 weeks of football, they have scored less points than they scored in 2 weeks of football. This is getting to be an issue. They were being considered a great team after 2 weeks, after destroying the Cowboys, a team that we thought was a good team at the time. They come out there, dud after dud after dud. And Spencer Rattler, while he isn't the greatest quarterback, isn't getting the help he needs, right? We talk about it a lot with the Jaguars, with bad teams like that a lot of times people want to place all the blame on quarterbacks because yes, they're the public facing image. They're the one that always has the ball in their hands, and it's a 90% of the time, I won't go that high, 70% of the time, you can say, yeah, the quarterback's bad, so the team is bad. There's a correlation there, but it doesn't always work that way. And I think the Saints are one of them. The main reason this team is struggling, the main reason this team is not performing is because of injuries. The offensive line is decimated. The defense is just scraps at this point, and the wide receiver room is left with nothing. You had wide receiver 1, Cedric Wilson, last night. That is not a person that I thought was still in the NFL. Bub Means had a huge game as a rookie last week. He was wide receiver 2. This is not a great offense. Clint Kubiak, for all the praise he was getting in the first 2 weeks of the season, has not backed it up. This is a Saints team that needs to go back to the drawing board, and they're starting to come back down to earth. Or starting, I think they've well fallen at this point back down to earth. But they seriously need to think more about what the future of this team holds. Derek Carr might get healthy next week. And I think they have to make a decision. Are they going to continue to try to win this season? And I don't know if it's worth it. Obviously, they're going to continue to try to win. What I mean by that is, are they going to let the young guys like a Spencer Rattler, like a Jake Haener, maybe give one of those two a shot? Because Derek Carr is not the future of that franchise. He isn't. No one is thinking he is. If someone says Derek Carr is the future of that franchise, I don't know what to tell them. They just don't know ball there. He's not the future of that franchise. He is a stopgap quarterback that they paid a lot to keep the Saints competitive, and yet the Saints are not competitive. The Saints, for the last 10 years, since they won their last Super Bowl, have been in this cap situation where they can't really improve their team, where they can sit here and say, we're going to try and compete, but they're so limited financially that they just keep on getting more and more mid, and they reach that middle point. They reach that middle point around the time that Drew Brees retired, right? They reached that middle point, and now they're continuing to stick it out. We can still compete. Keep trying to field this roster. Keep pushing the money down the line. Keep playing with the cap. It catches up eventually, and we're seeing them go from contender to playoff team to mid-tier team. Now they're all the way at the bottom. Now they're just a bad team in the NFL, and they need to think about selling it off and rebuilding, and they need to do it quick because they cannot continue this process of trying to compete over and over and over and over again, because as we're seeing, the quality of the team just keeps diminishing year in and year out until a point where they just are the worst team. And at this point, they only have maybe 1-2 seasons left before they're competing for that number 1 overall pick organically. I think it's time they sell the house. I think it's time they move on. And I think the Saints need to figure that out soon. I think Dennis Allen is on the hot seat. He was at the beginning of the season for me, and he hasn't done anything to prove that he shouldn't be there. That team needs a hard reset. They need to reset the whole team away from the Sean Payton era because they're still kind of in it. Dennis Allen, longtime assistant of Sean Payton. In his homecoming here, they get destroyed. The Sean Payton era is over in New Orleans, and they need to realize that, and they need to move on and hit the reset button hard. At least that's what I think. That's my big takeaways from this game. The Broncos dominate. If their defense can continue to play like this, they are a team that can compete for a playoff spot. Bo Nix played good football too. Wasn't great. Good football though. But anyway, let me know what your thoughts are. We're going to take a quick break here. When we come back, we turn our attention to the world of baseball. An instant classic over in Cleveland, Ohio last night, and another dominant performance from the LA Dodgers. We break down all of the MLB action from last night. Coming up next here on Sports by GSMC Podcast Network.